From showing support for the various suspensions made by PFL over doping tests to holding USADA accountable for not testing some fighters, here's what Chael Sonnen had to say about the PFL's PED issue. The American gangster believes the issue is non-existent. This conversation began on the American promoter's YouTube channel. Initially, Sonnen stated that there were several ways to look at the situation of the PFL's drastic suspension spree. Shortly after, though, he straight up claimed that there was no problem surrounding performance-enhancing drugs. He said in his opinion, the PFL did a good job actually, since they went out to Nevada and caught 9 guys. It wasn't the league that had the problem. In fact, they actually had a pretty good system in place to catch any unsuspecting fighters. It's the retired mixed martial artist's belief that this stream of PED suspensions will serve as a warning and a teaching moment for up-and-coming fighters. Now, you might be wondering, well, why is he being so harsh on the suspended guys? There's lots of cases of fighters accidentally taking substances too. Well, Sonnen did address this common occurrence. He said that most people don't like to admit that these PED tests can show positive results because of mistakes on the fighter's parts. For example, a fighter might not be aware that whatever they're consuming is banned. In that case, while a suspension is a huge blow, it can teach them how to deal with such a situation and make an example of them for other fighters as well. It's kind of the way that it goes. I didn't see a big problem with it. I just didn't, were his remarks. If it sounds like he's speaking from past experience, that's because he kind of is. After all, the retired MMA athlete does have his own history with performance-enhancing drugs. He's claimed to have gotten away with more drug tests than he failed in his career. This particular confession happened on an episode of Steve O's Wild Ride podcast. The two were discussing the norm of Russian athletes taking PEDs when Sonnen revealed info about his own past with substances.
Those guys didn't know. Like, I will tell you, I mean, that is a very sophisticated world. I don't know if anybody's failed more drug tests than me, but the other side of it is I don't know if anybody's gotten away with more drugs than me, right? I mean, they got...
Of course, any UFC fan worth their medal will know that the American gangster has failed quite a number of drug tests during his career. He'd even suffered a 2-year suspension from Nevada State Athletic Commission over this issue, but we never really knew the true extent of his activities with PEDs. On the podcast, the promoter said that while he'd had a long history of failing drug tests, he'd also managed to get away with passing way more of them than he should have. We even got a number, folks. The UFC detected over 7 different substances in his system, but according to Sonnen, he was actively taking at least 17. Really makes you think about whether these tests even work properly or not. How did one fighter fly under the radar while having 10 more substances in his bloodstream? Chael commented on this too, saying that the UFC's tests aren't all that good, clearly. And while the retired fighter has been unapologetic after failing his drug tests, like in 2014, his views on the topic have definitely shifted. He didn't even sympathize with the 9 fighters caught by the PFL in May 2023. Speaking of, several of these fighters' matches were overturned to no contest after PED suspension. It seems like PFL weren't kidding when they talked about a zero-tolerance policy regarding the usage of banned substances. While a total of 9 PFL fighters have been dealt suspensions because of failing doping tests, a few have received an even shorter end of the stick by having their matches overturned to no contests. Bruno Capelozza, the 2021 PFL World Champion, is one among these. Coming off of his monumental victory in April 2023, he's been high on the radar. This win avenged his last loss with a massive KO and a quick 6. But unfortunately, Capelozza's winning high couldn't last long. The Brazilian fighter tested positive for drostanolone, an anabolic steroid, shortly after. This has had some major consequences for the martial artist's career. Firstly, he's been suspended from the league for 9 months, ending on January 7th, 2024. Secondly, he won't be able to compete without paying a whopping $11,125 fine, with $326 in prosecution fees. And lastly, of course, his memorable victory over Scheffel won't be remembered as that. Rather, the match has been declared a no contest. He wasn't the only fighter who met such a fate. Featherweight Alejandro Flores has faced disciplinary action after having tested positive for the diuretic furosemide. A 6-month-long suspension period has been set, ending on October 1st, 2023, and the fine racks up to $2,600 in his case. His win against Daniel Torres is also now officially a no contest. Now, while ex-UFC fighter Krzysztof Jotko didn't fight a match recent enough to get overturned to a no contest, he's landed himself a 6-month suspension for clomiphene, a selective estrogen receptor modulator used to alter testosterone levels in men. It's crazy how the PFL has managed to verify the banned substance in each fighter's case so quickly. The Nevada State Athletic Commission also decided to extend temporary suspensions against some other PFL fighters. The one-time UFC challenger and PFL light heavyweight Thiago Santos, who tested positive for clomiphene, An uncertain suspension awaits him now. Daniel Torres and Will Fleury both failed the test because of their drostanolone consumption, while Rizvan Kunyev and Cesar Ferreira got caught abusing a bunch of different substances. The latest, aka Mohamed Fakhreddin, though, had an inexcusable drug identified in his test. This is GW1516, a non-specified substance that's used as a hormone and metabolic modulator and is completely off limits. The PFL has been immediate in their suspension of all these fighters, clearly enforcing strict rules for the future. But what's really caused an uproar is the suspension of 3 UFC fighters. The first 2 of the UFC fighters to be incriminated are Kyler Phillips and Darius Flowers. Phillips got pulled from his UFC Vegas 71 fight card, while Flowers was from the UFC Vegas 70 bout for failing a drug test for Ostarine. Obviously, a fine was given to him and a 6-month suspension as well. This is kind of what sparked the PFL suspension spree, but the massive backlash from fans is over Rob Wilkinson's involvement in this issue. Basically, the 2022 PFL light heavyweight champion was pulled from his bout with Ty Flores on grounds of failing a PED test. It's kind of ridiculous to think that Will Fleury was set to be Wilkinson's opponent in the bout, but he ended up suspended because of the drug test too. So he was replaced with Flores. What's so important about Wilkinson being pulled from the 2023 PFL season is that it deprives him from becoming a back-to-back champion. After having come off of an absolute banger season in 2022, gaining a total of 4 wins and eventually a PFL belt, it's tough that he's faced this issue just the next year. Some fighters get to go scot-free when it comes to drug testing, though. A certain multi-millionaire Irish UFC fighter has managed to evade drug testing sometimes, and people have been pissed. Chael Sonnen has voiced his concern about this as well. He's bashed the US anti-doping agency for not testing Conor McGregor. UFC fans have been waiting for a McGregor-Chandler bout with bated breath. And of course, the Irish fighter needs to be cleared by USADA to participate in the fight. But there had been certain disagreements between McGregor and the USADA officials about conditions for the test. This resulted in the Irishman completely foregoing the testing pool. While these issues were going on, UFC vet Chael Sonnen spoke up, blaming USADA for not testing Conor when he was in Nevada. He had been in the state for the shooting of a reality series, opening up the perfect opportunity for a PED test at the time. Sonnen, seeing this, thought that USADA were working in McGregor's favor, but in a YouTube video later uploaded on the American Gangsters channel, he cleared things up a bit. He mentioned that the anti-doping agency had reached out to him, telling him that they couldn't test a fighter who's entered the testing pool. Think this is an extremely vague explanation? Yeah, Chael wasn't buying that either. He claimed that the agency had the ability to walk right up to McGregor and demand a test, and yet they elected not to do that. He added that even historically, that's not how they've operated. Clearly, Sonnen was implying that Notorious was receiving special treatment. One thing about him, he doesn't shy away from expressing his thoughts, however controversial they may be. So, from the American Gangster's remarks about Conor McGregor's evasion of the testing pool to his dismissive attitude towards PFL's PED suspensions, here was everything Chael has said regarding the drug test issue.